I feel like I'm just like stuck in one of those like whirlwind things and you're just like, ah.
Welcome back to another episode of Suckcessfull, the podcast.
I'm one of your hosts, Blake, and joining me,
I'm one of your other hosts, Justin.
And this is the podcast all about the not so subtle truth about success and
the art of sucking less in pursuit of it. Let's not waste any more time and get right to the show.
Justin, you want to tell everybody where you just came back from?
It's going to break my heart a little bit here, Blake. So last week we recorded while I was in Hermosa Beach, and now this week I'm back in Texas. You're in Florida. We're back to normalcy. And I got to tell you, I've kind of had this adjustment period here of changing my expectations a little bit, because over there, it's weird. Even with all the strikes and all these things going on in the entertainment industry, it's still, there's like a palpable feeling out there of hope and enthusiasm and drive and everything else. It's very weird. I feel like I crossed that border back here, and it's not a bad feeling. It's not as driven. It doesn't feel the same. And so I've had to like change my expectations a little bit here. And this is day 2 of being home, and I feel great. I mean, I love being home, but I miss that kind of feeling that you get there of, it's like, I don't want to say endless possibilities. There's some sort of driving force there. Does that make any sense?
It does. I've always kind of, I guess, felt that with California. That's part of why I think California is home to me, is it does have this sort of energy to it. And some people think that, oh, it's because it's more fast paced. And I'm sure that has something to do with it, but it's not quite that, because like I've lived in New York and I've lived in LA. And if I were to compare the two, New York is very fast paced, whereas
Absolutely.
LA is like fast paced, but relaxed. Like it has this different sort of feeling to it that most people don't know what I mean unless they've been there or they grew up there like you have. But I don't know. There's just this energy there where I don't know. It's like buzzing energy. Do you know what I mean? Like it feels like
Yes.
There's energy going places. It's not just movement for the sake of movement or fast paced for the sake of being fast paced. Like it feels more intentional, maybe.
I think that's a great word to use there. It is intentional. And I would also add that, as you said, that this is kind of my summation of the fast pace out there. I call it pot fast, where it's like, because, like when you're in New York, the way I describe it, and I'm sure people are going to love this analogy, but it seems like Coke fast out there. Everyone's just like, yes, 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 like they're going and they're driven and they're just, it has to be this moment. Whereas in California, it feels like, especially Southern California, it's like driven to go forward at a reasonable pace. They're a little bit methodical, sometimes lazy, whatever, but they're driven towards something, but it's not this rush. It's more like, okay, this is going to happen. Let's pursue it kind of thing. And so if we had to, because you love drug analogies so much, I'm just going to go there today. We'll say, New York is Coke speed, LA is pot speed, and neither one is necessarily better than the other. It's just different. Coming back here, it's funny because out there, I do forget that like a lot of people don't have kids out there. I forget that it's a very singles kind of oriented world. Even families, you don't see families together. You see people together, but not families. And here, you're surrounded by families all the time. And that's a big change too.
I totally forgot about that. Yeah, because there's only specific pockets where you find more of those bigger families, like Little Armenia or like even Los Feliz. But yeah, most of them, no. Santa Monica is really hit and miss. And usually if they do have kids, it's like one.
That's my point. Yeah, it's not like here where if you don't have 4 kids, you did something wrong. Are you infertile? What happened? So as we start today, I think this is a great segue, and I appreciate you kind of letting me start this way, because I think it's a cool subject matter today of talking about, I'm trying to think how to summarize this beautifully here, but I'm kind of lost for a beautiful moment here because I'm stuck here. My brain is not as creative as it was out there. So I'm just going to come out there and say that let's talk about today about the expectations and mindset and kind of how you get stuck in places and how to overcome that. Does that sound fair?
Yeah, let's talk about it. So I'll tell you something that I've been struggling with. And I actually had to get on the phone with my best friend the other day and just vent because I was so frustrated. He was like, I can tell that you're frustrated. What is going on? You were so productive. You were doing all these things. And then you just kind of like stopped. And over the last week, the first half of last week, super productive, really driven, very intentional. Towards the end of the week, I got frustrated because I felt like I didn't know which direction to go in. And it's like, I have these new ideas about how I want to move forward. I have these businesses that I want to move forward with. It's just like trying to figure out the financial stability part, but also not doing things as a means to an end. but also making sure I'm moving forward on my goals. I just like got everything together, was really excited. And then suddenly it just stopped. And I was just frustrated. And I was like, I don't know what direction to go in. I don't know what I should be doing, because on one hand, I have these companies reaching out to me, wanting to work with me. On the other hand, I don't want to work with them. I want to do these things. And it was just this big clusterfuck, essentially, of me like going and spinning my wheels in a circle and being very just confused and frustrated about it. And he finally sat me down and he's like, listen, he said, you're not as directionless right now as you think you are. You're just overthinking everything. And he's like, what do you really want to do? And I was like, well, I want to do this, but I can't do it because of that. And he's like, no. What do you really want to do? And how can you get to that? Take the other pieces out of it. What do you really want to do? Take the money part out, take the expectations out, take all these things. What is it that you really want to do? If there was nothing in the way of it, there were no obstacles, no nothing. And I said, well, my problem is I want to do multiple things. I want to do more than one thing. And he said, okay, that's fine. But then you have to figure out how to do those three things at the same time. You have to move forward on it. He said, if you're just sitting here, he said, part of it is like you started and then you got frustrated and you stopped because you got unsure about it. He's like, you just have to keep going. And I was like, but what if I make the wrong decision? And I got very caught up on the whole idea of like, it has to be the right decision and it has to be this and it has to fit in this box, right? And he was like, I'm surprised you're struggling with this because you normally don't struggle with these things. And I said, I don't know what the hell's going on. I think partially because I sort of changed careers a little bit. And so I'm trying to figure that out because there's certain things I never thought I would have an interest in that have caught my attention in the last several months. So it's been sort of this process of me having to journal a lot and decide, because I feel like I still want to do some of these other things, but they're not as prevalent anymore. So it's been this ongoing journey for me the last like week and a half. And finally I got to a point where I got over the overwhelm of it. And I just started doing some things and testing things out and seeing if I really like certain things. And that's helped a lot. But I just like got stuck in my head. It was this weird process. And he's right. I normally don't have this problem. So I was like, I don't know what to do.
But I think what you're going through is totally normal. And I think we forget that for people like us that are really self-motivated, self-driven, and most of the time you see something in your way, you're going to plow through it, you're going to crush it, you're going to find either a way around or through it. And I think sometimes, like, especially for me, I'm kind of going through something similar where the last month or so has been like just a weird change for me. It's just been crazy. And going through that I've gone through the stages of doubt. A lot of doubt, like in terms of my abilities, everything else. I feel like I've been challenged on that level. I feel like I've been challenged in terms of direction because there's a million things I want to do. It's interesting that your friend's advice is very true, that I think in those moments, it's not what I've come to the realization of through journaling and everything else, and just even self-reflection, is it's not the lack of focus. It's sometimes the doubt that gets in the way. That's what I find in myself, that it's that anytime I start doubting, that's when I feel, because my weakness is insecurity. Like if I'm feeling insecure, like it'll be that chip in the glass, and then it just keeps slowly growing over time. And you're like, it's too big to fix. You got to replace the window, right? So for me, the minute I feel that, I have to conquer that. I have to get over that and figure out what's bothering me there and then patch it real quick before it grows, because otherwise I feel like it metastasizes and grows to something that just sucks. And so I think for me, going to California is really helpful. Being around those people that are creative and kind of reminding me of all that stuff is really important. But I also think part of it too is having interesting conversations. Like yesterday, I had a really interesting conversation with somebody that it just put me down a path that I never thought about before. And I realized very quickly that I was having limiting beliefs, which is, I mean, today's topic is really about limiting beliefs, but it just hit home because I was talking. I said, what about this? And he's like, well, why are you thinking small like that? And I'm like, what? And he's like, look, what if you put it in this perspective or did this differently? And I'm like, wait a second, you're right. Like, I'm that creative guy, and sometimes what I find is, and I don't know if you feel this way, but I want to ask you this too. Sometimes I feel like that fire's going so big, it's going to train and we're just firing down and going 100 miles an hour down the track. And I'm like, yes. And sometimes I feel like I need some more coal in that engine. The fire's kind of going out a little bit. I'm still moving forward, but it's not at the same pace. And sometimes I feel concerned there of what's happening. And so I think being flexible and understanding that all these feelings are normal. You're a human being, no matter how hard we try to think about it in terms of mental strength. Like, that's stupid. I realized that too. Like, if you're always strong, you're going to break eventually because you're a human. You've got a million emotions, right? Journaling's really helpful, but I also think understanding that it's okay sometimes not to have the answers and let the the answers come, but don't be desperate for the answer. And so with that, I'm going to pass it over to you and get your thoughts.
I think you just dropped a knowledge bomb on that one, because that's definitely something I was struggling with for sure. Was I felt like I needed to have all the answers. And it's funny because I mean, he even was like, listen, you've been a pioneer in all your industries. You think outside the box all the time. You go against these things. Like when somebody says you can't do A, B, and C, you go do A, X, B, Z, Y, J, whatever. He's like, you literally have always been that person. And he's like, why are you getting so caught up in he's like, you've always been able to rely on yourself to make sure that you make it one way or another. So why are you doubting that? I don't know. I think it's because I'm stepping out in a way that I haven't done before. And he was very like, listen, you haven't been in just freelance for a long time because you got fed up with it. And then you moved back from California and everything shifted because the industry isn't in Florida. So you had to adapt. And he's like, well, now that you're talking about moving back and you're in the process of getting these other things off the ground, he said the freelance part, especially when you get comfortable with knowing exactly where your money's coming from and exactly how much and all that every month, it gets very hard to go back to that life completely. He said, you have been talking about just getting more clients. You've been talking about doing these things. Just go do it. He said, quit trying to, this, that. He said, you're getting too caught up in the process of it. He's like, just do it. Just go out and do it. Just start advertising, start talking about it. Just go do it. He's like, that's how you've done everything else. And he brought up the pilot that I did before we went to California. And he's like, you managed to get all that together with no money. He's like, you can do this, but you've got to start it. And I don't know why, I just felt like I couldn't start. I guess I just felt overwhelmed because I felt like I didn't know where to start was the problem. I knew all these things needed to happen and like the things that I'm wanting to do really do tailor to all of my industries in one. But starting it was like, I don't know where to start. I know there's these 5 things that I could do, but which one should I be doing first? And I felt like I had to know all the answers of it and had to know exactly the process. And I got so caught up in my own head about it. And it was weird because it's like, I almost kind of forgot who I was for a second. And it's really easy when you start doubting to do that. And I think what you said about feeling like what you were talking about, use the train analogy. I think part of that is for us creatives, we're constantly in that mindset of wanting to create. We're constantly wanting to put our energy into that. That is more of a nurturing energy. That is an energy of emotion is more backed behind it, right?
Yeah.
But then we get so like, oh, wait a minute, but we have to be logical and practical and realistic, and we have to do all these things. But honestly, if you think about it, most of the time, the things that you do that are really great aren't completely rational. They don't come together in a completely rational way or practical way. It is a lot of you set the tone, you start it, and then the right people just happen to get gravitated towards you, or you happen to meet the right person or run into the right person, or catch the interest of that one person, and then it changes everything. But that's not a logical thing. So it's hard when you're having to step out of your comfort zone and you're having to get rid of these limiting beliefs to remember that sometimes moving forward, you can't just be logical or just be emotional or just be creative or just be practical. Like you kind of have to find that in between where it's a balanced energy and move forward with intention and have trust that whatever you're doing, as long as you're doing it intentionally and you're moving forward in a way that is in alignment with what it is you're trying to do, you're still making progress. And this gets back to when we talked about progress before, how I said I had to redefine progress. I keep finding I have to keep redoing that because I'm still caught in these limiting beliefs around progress and what that means and measuring it, and these limiting beliefs around success and this stuff. And it's annoying.
It sucks. And I think you said a bunch of just wonderful things there. And I'm going to give you kind of an example because on the road trip, I listened. So the movie Oppenheimer is coming out this week. And I've always been fascinated by Oppenheimer. The book that the movie's based on, that Christopher Nolan based the movie on, is, I think, 36 hours of an audiobook. But if you listen at double speed and you've got 24 hours in the car, you can do it. So I listened to it, but there's something really interesting in there. And I think that you said something about process, and you said getting caught up in the process of things. And it was really interesting because I don't know much about quantum mechanics in physics. I never really understood the concept, but they go into it a little bit and they talk about it. And one of the problems that Einstein had with it was that it's basically the idea that at the quantum level, the very, very small level, basically anything can happen at any time. There's no rules at the quantum level. That's kind of the theory behind it. And I don't know how it works or whatever, but it makes sense though in this kind of instance in terms of Einstein didn't like it because his theories all revolve around math can solve anything and that there's a method to the madness in all of nature. And what quantum mechanics says is, look, sometimes things happen. You just can't explain it. It just happens. And so I think what you were saying about balance is also part of this in terms of it doesn't make sense sometimes. And sometimes you can have the best processes in the world and they don't work. But I think between faith, between knowing what you can do because you've done it in the past, between understanding that you started, it works out. It doesn't always work out exactly the way you want it to at that moment, but it'll work out. I think to me, that was really helpful to kind of hear that even at the quantum level, it's chaos. So I'm like, okay, perfect. Sometimes things are going to be chaos. And we try to organize chaos all the time. And I think that's where we fail as a human species because it doesn't work. You can't organize chaos. But what you can do is flow with it, go with the energy, go with it, and ride that wave or whatever the analogy you want to use, and be part of the process. Don't fight the process. And I think what I find is when I'm having limiting beliefs or whatever, I'm fighting something. Like I'm against something, whether it is something someone told me because, X, Y, and Z. What I find also, other people's limiting beliefs sometimes become mine. I may have never thought of something and then talking to a friend or a spouse or whatever, and all of a sudden you're like, wait, I never thought of it that way. Wait, should I? It's just like, crap. And I don't like to worry. That's not who I am. And I find that when I do worry, it becomes not only limiting beliefs, but just it seems so distant from me. Like I feel separated from myself. Sometimes coming back to it and understanding that, okay, yes, things are going to be chaotic occasionally, but understanding that you just ride the wave, go with it, stay with your focus in terms of what you want to do. It may look like a crazy river that turns and twists and floods and whatever, but eventually you get to the sea. I think that is a piece of it that separates some of the creative people from others is that you keep going. Your friend that was talking about, you have to start and keep going. That is the trick. Like, that is the secret sauce. What's hard is when you start thinking about where do I start? Like you did, and I did sometimes, I've done this recently. Like, where do I start? Just start, start doing it. Like even journaling or having these conversations or start mind mapping or just take an action today. Like I'm going to do this one thing. That's action. That precipitates more action. So I think that to me is how I'm starting to get through this whole thing and understand it better. And that's been really helpful to me. I've realized probably the last week or so, my attitude's been better. I've been less moody. I've been much more reticent to understand that look, I'm just going to keep going. Just keep going through this and I'm going to accept what comes. I'm going to deal with it. I'm going to get over it. That is kind of my deep analogy here with quantum physics of even with all the processes and everything else that we want to hone in on. Sometimes when you're going through this, it's helpful to remind yourself who you are, where you've come from, what you've done, and where you want to go. And don't worry about all the other stuff that goes on because that is chaos. That is noise. Filter through the noise and keep going.
Well, you said something interesting about taking on the limiting beliefs of other people. And what's interesting is we always talk about how energy can neither be created nor destroyed, but it can be changed into something else, a different kind of energy.
Einstein. Sorry.
But what's interesting about that is that we sometimes forget that essentially everything that we experience and that we come into contact with, we essentially consume that energy. And what I mean by that is regardless of whether it's a physical trauma you went through or a really exciting thing that you went through or a conversation that you had with somebody, that energy gets essentially translated to you and that other person. And there's an exchange there that happens. When that happens, you will actually consume that energy and that experience, and it becomes a part of you as you move forward. Now, in what regard of how you consume it and how it becomes a part of you is up to you, in the sense that if you start listening to other people, then you'll start taking on those beliefs. If you choose to go against it, then you'll have more chance at being able to be more reflective and thinking about what you want to do and move forward with. And I think that kind of gets into the default settings of sometimes we have these mindsets, these thoughts, and these feelings that are either from previous experiences that we've already been through and consumed of that energy that end up just sort of popping up. And that's sort of almost like we had a default where it's just the automatic response. And if we start paying attention to our thoughts, our feelings, and things surrounding these different things, we'll start to realize where those default settings are. And we start to realize, okay, wait a minute, do I actually feel that way? No, I don't actually feel that way. And one of the things that I've noticed is that a lot of this stuff, stepping back into complete freelance, has to do with things that didn't work out in my past that I've been worried about repeating. And
Hang
one
on,
thing...
we need to pause there because that is your knowledge bomb. That is so important. I'm serious because that's perfect. That is such a great summary. And boom, my head blew. Great job. I think that's 100% true.
High five.
High five.
But yeah, I mean, it really has been, because as I was talking about it, I started talking about, well, what if this happens? What if that happens? And he was like, you do realize that all these what ifs that you're bringing up are things you've already conquered. You've already done that, which means you're already prepared for it. And you don't have to repeat it because you've already learned that lesson. And I was like, oh, yeah. But I think part of my problem with the starting and also how to go forward is that some of these things that I'm wanting to do are things that haven't been done before. So there's no like I am the guinea pig. I am the person who's moving forward. And for some reason, I'm getting all up in my head about it this time, and was like, well, I don't know why you're getting up in your head. I mean, we were literally the pioneers of social media marketing. We created all this video content before Reels was even a thing. I mean, that's part of where all that came from and why we had so many huge companies working with us. And I was like, oh, yeah. And he started pointing out all these things that I had done that were considered pioneering at the time. And I'm just over here like, yeah, that was before. He's like, you're disregarding all these things that you've done. I started thinking about it and I was like, I really have been disregarding it, because even though I did those things and that's great, it's like now I'm doing it again, but in a different way. And it's just like, I think that's part of the problem is doing this in the way I want to do it. There is nobody else to set the bar, set the standard. There's people who have similarities, but some of this stuff is stuff that's, I'm going to be the first to do it. They always tell you, and I think this is a limiting belief that a lot of people have, that you have to niche down. You have to be this certain thing in a box, or you have to do this one career or this one type of career. And I've always been like, well, fuck that. I'm going to do what I want to do. I am the niche. I am the person. And so I don't know, I think that's part of it, is trying to figure out, okay, if that's who I am, I need to embrace that instead of being scared of it, because that's a superpower, not something to be afraid of. But it is because I honestly am afraid of failure. That's what it is. I'm afraid I'm going to fail.
I think that's a very stoic and important realization, right? Because once you understand that, you can get over it. And I think that when you talk about having a superpower, just in general, they are scary though sometimes, because other people don't interpret sometimes your superpower the way you do. That to me is sometimes where I get dissuaded as well, in terms of going down that path and starting to get myopic in my view and being less open to things. I question those superpowers, things that I know I'm just crushing at. Like for you, when you talked about like social media and being a pioneer, like one of the words I've been using a lot recently is pioneer for me. That kind of that word that I'm going back to remind myself, you've done this many, many times. Get out of here. Let's stop getting caught in here. And the question I keep coming back to is, we've got this great mind. You've got this really powerful entity up here. Why do I keep going back here?
You get fixated in your head on something and then you just keep going. And
it's like a damn hamster wheel. Yeah.
Yeah. And then you spiral. And I usually am really good at catching myself before I spiral, but lately that has not been the case. And I think it's just because there's so many huge changes happening at one time and I'm a little overwhelmed. My lease is up, so I'm in the middle of moving. I'm dealing with stuff with my dog recovering from his injury. I'm in the middle of switching jobs. I'm starting a business. I'm doing all this stuff. It's like literally everything at one time. So it's just like, I feel like I'm just like stuck in one of those like whirlwind things. And you're just like, ah.
There's no place like home. There's no place like home. Yeah.
Somewhere over the rainbow.
But Think about what you just said, though. So this to me is very, humbling is not the right word, but kind of what brings me home. When I start listing out things I'm going through and I'm still dealing with it all, you realize that like what you said you're going through between moving, your dog, career, all that sort of stuff. Most people go through one of those and freak out. Okay.
That's true.
That's what helps me sometimes. I'm like, look, I'm still going forward with all this crap. That's a superpower. That is when you can listen to it. Like I encourage you when you're editing this, to listen to that part over and over again and be like, okay, yeah, I can, because listening to it and hearing yourself say it and knowing that you're still going forward, that is beyond a superpower. Because most people, I mean, listen, when you talk to someone, like my favorite is, how's today? You're like, you're already failing today. You are already failing. Okay, let me tell you what I've had to deal with before 10 a.m. today, and I'm still going forward. And so I think that you'll find as salvation for some of these things that your strength is inspiring and it is genuine. It's one of those things that I think, just like anything else, the problem with some of this stuff is that there's time. Limiting beliefs, just in this regard, is we want them solved like this. And what I've learned over time is I'm not good at waiting, but I'm learning to wait. But I'm not waiting and hoping things come to me. I'm still doing other things in the process, which speeds that process up a little bit, but it also gives me time to deal with whatever I'm going through at the same time, as opposed to burying it, which I used to do a lot of. I'm not perfect at it. I still have a few things, we always joke about the moat and the landmines and everything else, but they get better every week and they get better every day. And so I think with limiting beliefs, one of the big things that I've learned is surrendering to them and realizing that they're there, but don't become victim to them. Understand that they're there. Realize that they're not you. They're a perception that you're either seeing or you're projecting onto yourself. Don't listen to it. Just don't believe it because it's not true.
Well, I think RuPaul talks about it really well because in his book, I think it's Guru, or it might be his other one. I can't remember, but he talks about how you have sort of this inner saboteur that will whisper these things about you and doubts. And he says it's dangerous because that inner saboteur is just as creative, just as smart as you are, but it knows all your weaknesses and all the things you're afraid of. And it'll sit there and it'll use its wits to try to trick you into thinking that you're not worth what you are. He always says you have to say, thanks for sharing, but I'm going to do this instead. And it's been a process of me feeling like I really have had to do that over the last week. Thanks for sharing, going this way anyway, which is funny because my best friend's just like, you are one of those people who doesn't love when someone tells you what to do. So why are you listening to yourself telling you what to do? And I was like, I never thought about it that way.
That's interesting. I think it's very appropriate, but I think it's also one of those things that I've actually never really thought about that. That's a really cool what RuPaul said. I think that is important to say, kind of what I was talking about, like you're accepting it, right? You're understanding that it's there. I hadn't really thought about it being almost the perfect foe to you because it knows all your weaknesses. It knows, your insecurities, everything else. And so I think acknowledging it in that fashion and pushing it aside and saying, thank you. I understand. I see you. I'm going to appreciate what you're doing, but no, thank you at the same time. And I think that's a really cool way of doing it. So RuPaul, thank you. Blake, I think that's pretty insightful.
Well, I will say his books are I highly recommend them. They will make you think about things differently, which is cool, which is why I quote him a decent amount. I like his show, but that's not the reason why I quote him. But anyhow, I think the other thing to this is when you are talking about your superpowers and knowing what they are, that part is great, but sometimes knowing what to do with them is a whole different problem. And that's been part of my thing too, with how to start and where these limiting beliefs and stuff are coming from. Is my fear is that I'm not going to use the skills and powers that I have to make the most impact. And that's my thing, is this year has been very focused on intention and impact. And those two aspects of making sure everything I'm doing is intentional and done with intention and that it's making an impact. And I think that sometimes when you have multiple skills or you have multiple interests, it's also hard to discern exactly where your time is best spent. And he kept asking me that because he's like, well, what do you want to do? And I'm like, I don't know. I want to do all these things. And he's like, what if you had to pick one? And I said, I'm not going to pick one. And he said, well, then don't. But then you only have so many hours in a day. There's going to be certain things you're going to have to compromise on. And it really got me thinking because I was like, he has a point. And he said, part of your problem is you still haven't learned how to completely balance between your work and your downtime. And so part of that is you're overworking, so you're hyperfixating, and then you're not actually giving your mind time to rest properly. So you're getting into this cycle again where you're spinning your wheels and you're getting frustrated and overwhelmed because you're not actually being overly intentional with everything you're doing. He's like, you're rushing everything. He's like, you need to slow down. And part of it is I feel like I'm on this time crunch with certain things because there's so many things happening in the industry and all this stuff. And I feel like I have to make a decision right now, but I actually don't have to make a decision right now. And I think sometimes taking that step back so that you can take the steps forward intentionally is better. And I know we've even talked about that in other episodes, but I don't know what it is that's tripping me up so bad this time. I mean, it's just like been one thing, like it feels like every time I'm like, all right, here we go. It's like a piano drops, like the Acme things, like something drops right there in front of me. It's like, nope, you're not moving. Like,
damn it.
And I'm just, it's like, I need dynamite. I can blow it all up. And then it's like, I blow one thing up and then something else comes, like, damn it.
You just keep building that crater, right? Because you keep blowing it up and you're like, damn it.
I feel like, what is it? Wile E. Coyote, where he like runs off the cliff and he's still running and he thinks he's going somewhere. And then he just like, and he falls. That's what it feels like.
Those are my favorite. I love also, like you were talking about the piano. I love the anvil, like everything moves and he pulls the string and he's like, oh crap, that boom. That's the worst. I've been there many times. I feel that too. And I think but laughter, like you're talking about here, you laughing at this is also a trick, right? That's also something to help you get over this. You said something interesting a second ago in terms of getting stuck, like, basically we talked about the hamster wheel a little bit. And I think one of the things to do is the solution is what you said a second ago, is letting your mind rest, because part of it is that you've got, and maybe I'm answering my own question from earlier here, is that you've got this huge energy source up here, right? You've got this unbelievable powerhouse of stuff. It needs rest, because if it doesn't rest, then it manifests the stuff that you are worried about in terms of, the hamster wheel of crap. And I think that the rest is really, really key. And one of the things I've realized is that downtime is important, right? And I've talked about that many times here. And then the other thing you talked about that I think is interesting, and I think that as a society, we struggle with this. And this is one of those things that I've realized a while ago, that don't compromise. And I know it sounds weird, but I've really struggled with this one. And I find that every time I compromise, I feel like a dick. I'm like, I feel like I gave something up. I think that compromise is the answer for people that don't have the answer.
Oh, that's a good point. That's a good point, because I'll tell you, with the compromising part, I am not very good at that.
I'm horrible at it. I don't compromise.
Because I am that person. If you tell me I'm not going to do something because I decided I'm going to do it, I'm going to go do it. And then I'm going to do it 3 times better just because you pissed me off by saying I couldn't do it. I'm unfortunately sometimes that way. But I mean, I think it's more of, though, it gets me back to that point of, okay, if I'm not compromising and I'm doing this and it's not been done before, how do I move forward? And that was when he was just like, you just have to move forward. You just have to, it doesn't have to be the right step, because any step you take towards progress is the right step. And when he worded it that way, I was like, that's a good point. Gets back to the progress is progress, Blake. We learned this a couple weeks ago. Clearly, it didn't get through all the way. My big hard head.
Well, unfortunately, you and I both have big hard heads there. That's all I'm going to say is I suffer from that too. It's so easy to espouse it, right? And be like, it. But then to put it into practice, you're like, wait a second here. Oh God, I'm being a hypocrite.
I really felt like that. I was like, oh man, I even talked about that on a podcast episode like 3 episodes ago.
But to me,
and I was like, and I felt like I made so much progress at it. I'm like,
But this to me is the progress, though, that you acknowledged it. That's huge. Most people would just push through and be like, no, I didn't do that. No, I didn't. There's no way I did that. What? But I also think that this whole thing, this entity of insecurity, I think that is the challenge. And I think that what I mean by not compromising is doing what you need to do. Don't compromise in terms of your values, in terms of all these other things. Compromise is the easy way, because you say, okay, well, I'm only going to do these 2 things as a compromise. But if you say, look, I'm going to do these 4 because I need to, it's a different answer. You get it's a better question, you get a better answer and all that kind of stuff. Briefly, the other day, someone was asking me about, because I this has been a theme recently about not compromising, and pissed some people off with this. I'm like, well, that's your insecurities, not mine. And one of the things they said was, well, how do you do it with someone you don't like? And I said, you either forgive them and then you can do it genuinely, or you let it fade and you don't deal with it. But you don't compromise. You don't say, look, I'm going to apologize just because I have to apologize. That's a very immature way of handling it. And my 14-year-old does that all the time. I'm too old to be doing that. So the way to do it is to acknowledge it and forgive the person, say, look, I am actually wrong here or whatever, or don't deal with it and move forward and keep going the other way. Because in no point are you supposed to do either of those things. It's how you deal with it in what you feel is appropriate. You push through and do that stuff. And so like with doing, let's say you want to do 10 things, you've got this board, you got your vision board, you've got 10 things on there. You don't need to compromise and say, I'm only going to do these 4. I've never met anyone successful who's like, look, I really wanted to do 10 things, but I did 1 really well. Well, okay, what about the other 9? And then they're always depressed. No, they started here and then they went to this and they did this and they dabbled here. And I think with an active mind like yours and with the perseverance that you have and everything else, it's more about directing your energy in that right direction and not stopping to assess the right path.
I think that's the problem. I think you just dropped another knowledge bomb. Is I am overly analytical. That is my personality. I notice every little thing. I may not always bring it up, but I notice every little thing. And that's part of why people find me intimidating, because they know that I'll notice the little quirk in your mouth when you said something that you felt uncomfortable about. I'll notice that, you flick your fingers when you're agitated. I notice all those things. And I notice that about myself too. So it's like, I think it's getting caught up in that it has to be the right answer thing. I've been talking about this in my own other content too, about not trying so hard to get the straight right answer and not always just taking the easy middle of the road path. But when it feels like everything's not the easy way and all of it's hard, that's when you kind of get in this overthinking, over analytical spiral of, oh my God, what am I going to do? And that is part of what it is me just like spiraling into this, like, what if I do this wrong? What if I do that? What if this doesn't work? What if I spend all this time doing this and then nothing happens? And part of it is a little bit of impatience too, wanting to see the progress in leaps and bounds again, of that. Like, I want to see that something's working, but it's going to take longer to find out if it's working than a week. You know what I mean? Like,
I do. Yeah.
So it's just been this ongoing process. And sometimes I think too, we get sort of caught up in this idea that this is the destination, and that's part of it too. I had to go back and be like, this whole redefining of progress is going to be continuously redefined. As I continue to elevate, as I continue to move forward, I'm going to be redefining it every time, because my definition of that's going to change, because eventually I'm going to be thinking more than I'm going to be working, because I'm going to be a thought leader and I'm going to be these things. That's what it's going to be. I'm going to get paid more to think, to strategize, to coach people on how to do certain things right, how like to move forward with their strategies, how to do social media, all that, instead of doing all of it myself. And that's the thing, is like, that progress is going to be different. And then it's like, then I got to thinking of, well, how do you measure your progress on your thought process? Like, that gets into a whole different conversation. People think everything has to be numbers.
And again, I think that's the easy answer, right? I think that's what people go back to in terms of you have to measure it in a way that makes sense in terms of A plus B equals C. It doesn't always work that way. And if you look at the big moments in your life, as I kind of wrap up here, I'm going to give you 2 brief things, maybe 3 actually. So the first one is, numbers are easy in terms of saying, okay, I did 4 things today, I did 5 things, and you can measure against that. But if you look at what really launched you forward in anything, at any point in your life, whether it was a race, whether it was whatever, it's those intangible things that it's almost impossible to measure in terms of, I wanted to go from A to Z. Well, I did this, and this. If you had plotted that all out on a graph, it looks weird, because I went down here and then I did this. And then it's not linear is what I'm trying to say. Success isn't linear. It is a path and it's a journey. And so I think the more we kind of separate ourselves from that and realize that measuring your success in a more less tangible way, and something that you can plot in terms of is very, very hard. But if you take yourself out of that and say, I'm going to do this action today, whether it precipitates this reaction that I want, I'm not sure of, but I'm going to do this. That is very powerful. You use the word analyze. And so here's what I always do to get people out of this funk. And I do it for myself because it makes me laugh. So the root of analyze is anal. Okay. And I always say, well, that's just shit. And so, it gets you laughing, but you're like, wait a second here. If you overanalyze anything, because you listen to a stock report, you look at numbers all day, like an accountant, whatever, most of it's just shit. And I'm not demeaning any of these jobs. What I'm saying is that it's a repetitive, it's shit at the end of the day. It doesn't really mean a whole lot in terms of the actual value of things. And someone's going to come out, please post this below because I'd love to challenge this. I want this comment made. How can you say that? What does that mean? I'll challenge this. So challenge extended. And then my final little story here as I wrap up is I saw someone on my journey out there, an old buddy of mine. It was a great example of limiting beliefs that this was one of the few times I didn't try to solve the problem. I just listened. I didn't give any counters to it or anything like that. I just listened to what he had to say. And it was really fascinating to me because he's struggling right now because he was looking or is looking for a job. But he's coming at it from a place of, it was very funny because we worked at the same place for a while and he asked me how much I made there. And I told him, I'm very open with most of these things. And he was like, there's no way. And I'm like, okay, I'm not going to challenge you on this. He's like, well, so-and-so only made this. And I'm like, okay, what do you want me to do here? And then he's like, well, how much do you want to make now? And I was like, well, I'm not going to get into that, but I'll tell you that it's probably more than you want to make. And he's like, well, how's that even possible? And I'm like, you leading yourself down this path, you've got these blinders on that you've already defined what success looks like, and it doesn't fit into your box. There's no way you'll ever hit your target because you're not able to see outside of that. If you're looking at it and you say the max you can ever make, I'm just making up a number here, but it's like $100,000. The most you're ever going to make is $100,000. And then you're going to get above that. And then you're going to say, but I can't make more than 110,000 because no one here does that. You go to negotiate, you'll be shitty at negotiating. And so my point of this is that when it comes to these things, use someone as an example to get you out of this. Someone that you can aspire to, someone that you can think about that did something that seemed impossible. They overcame it and then persevered and made it through it. And there's a million examples of human history where this has happened. You can go back to Roman times or you can use an example from today. I don't care. There's someone that has done something, even in your industry that's new that you're trying to pioneer for, that has done something, hit a roadblock, felt despair, and still overcame, and they zigged when someone else zagged and just crushed the marketplace. That's what I go to whenever I'm feeling like that. And I didn't, again, try to solve his issues or whatever, because I was like, I think it's a losing game in that instance when you are so stuck in that mindset. My job isn't to solve their problem, but it's to listen at that stage of the game. And I'm going to prove them wrong. It's kind of where I go after that. And so as we wrap up, for me, that's kind of my advice to you out there is that if you are really feeling stuck and you are a pioneer and you are going down these paths and you're feeling all these things and you're on the hamster wheel of shit and you've got anal shit as well, all these things going on, gotta laugh a little, is to find someone. And the best part is doing a Google search. The best part about the internet is you can do a Google search for someone that you don't know. Don't go to your usual one. Go to someone that you've never even heard of before. Type it in, who did this? And there'll be like 15 people, 20, I don't know, someone come up and just pick on someone you've never heard of before and read what they did. And it is usually fascinating and it gets your mind in a creative space. And that's how I usually persevere.
I think that's great advice. And it's so funny because you brought up some things that I usually tell my clients when I'm talking about social media is that the analytics and the numbers are great, but if you're constantly chasing after trends and chasing after the numbers, you will always fail because you're not creating the numbers, you're not fostering them, you're not creating the trends. But part of that is being more focused on what you're doing instead of what the overall outcome is going to be of it in terms of certain expectations and assumptions, and focusing more on just trying to make the impact of what it is that you're trying to do and tell your story and achieve your story in a way that you want to achieve it. And it's funny because as you're saying all this, I'm literally like, this sounds familiar. Oh, because I said that too, but not about this. I should take my own advice. That was literally my thought process.
But don't you love those moments when you're like, hey, wait a second here. High five
I've heard this
me.
before. Oh, yeah.
But Blake, I think that just shows you your maturity here. And I talking about this stuff is always fun because it's, my favorite word of the year is cathartic. I think I say that once each episode, so I'm going to keep it up today. I won't say it again, But I think it's important, and I hope that for everyone else out there too, this is helpful to you to understand that like it's normal to go through these things. Everyone hits these roadblocks. It's less about hitting the roadblock. It's more about understanding what it takes for you to get out of it and what are those things that you can do, because for everyone it's going to be different. It's funny, like the thing you just said there makes me giggle, because when I see those moments and I'm like, oh my God, how did what? I didn't even take one of what happened here. I'm like, okay, that's insane. But it makes me feel good because I realized it. It's when I don't realize it that I'm like, ooh, something's off here. And so whatever it is, I think all those little things now that we've talked about it, we've given a bunch of tools and tricks, and we've kind of gone through different scenarios here. I think we've got a good foundation, not only for ourselves, but for other people to really go for it and to not worry about limiting beliefs, but worry more about what are these beliefs that you are really going to hold to, and how are you going to keep pursuing those?
And being intentional and choosing different ones that align to what it is that you're trying to do. And I think the hardest part sometimes about this stuff is admitting it in the first place. Like, in the beginning, my problem was when I was talking to my best friend about this was I didn't even know what the problem was. And that's where I was getting more frustrated because I was like, I don't know. I just feel demotivated. I feel this. I feel that. I feel this. And he was like, well, why? And I was like, I don't know. I just feel like I don't know what to do for once. I don't know what to do. And he was like, well, you never know that you don't know what to do. Like, that's bullshit. And I was like, but I feel that way. And he's like, well, then let's talk about it. And so it just took me like essentially talking it out, because sometimes, as great as writing everything out in your journal and stuff can be, sometimes you need that other person to be like, well, why the hell are you thinking this or that? Like, you need someone to kind of point it out to you, and you need that either mentor or someone to give you a different perspective on things so that you can move forward in a way that is analytical in the right ways. Because sometimes when we get so caught up in all these other things, we are overly analytical in the wrong ways, and we're hyper fixated on the limiting beliefs. We're hyper fixated on the what ifs that could never potentially even happen. We focus all of our intention and our action and our thoughts and our energy on those things instead of solving the problem. And I think that it's very easy to get caught up in the problem. It's really easy to get caught up in the problem. But when you have somebody else who could be like, listen, how can you solve the problem? Forget about how many other problems there could be or are or whatever. How can you solve the problem? Oh, yeah. Okay. That's a good, I see what you're doing there.
Because problems are all around. The only thing that I do when I find myself really stuck and I'm hyper fixated and just I can't get out of it, I'll ask, instead of seeing it as a roadblock, whatever, what's the opportunity here, right? I change it to get into that creative space, because it's easy. If you label everything as a problem, at least for me, what I find is that then I kind of only see problems. I see those roadblocks. I'm like, well, crap, I'm looking over there and shit, there's one, and oh, God damn it, what's happening here? But if I look at, okay, the opportunity, how do I flip this? What can I do in this instance here to be proactive, to take that step, to do whatever? I find that usually helps me in those instances. Do I acknowledge it right away? No. It's not like I look at it and go, oh, there's the opportunity. I sometimes it takes a day or two, because I'll be like, God, I'm stuck. And then I'll come back to it and I'll be like, okay, let's make this an opportunity. Because the other thing that I think a lot of people forget is they'll read a self-help book, or they'll follow someone on YouTube, or they'll go to a therapist or whatever, and they think the answers are easy. Okay, look at this as an opportunity. Well, sometimes you're like, F the opportunity. Like, I'm stuck, and you're like, okay, it's okay to have those feelings. I think it's important to acknowledge it, but then you need to take the action. But at first, sometimes you have to pause and look at it. Like, you admitting, like, I don't know, is important, because it's hard. And sometimes it's deflating, is what I would say too, is to not have the answer, because you want to always have the answer if you're the answer person. But I think the wiser move sometimes is understanding that you don't have the answer, and knowing that that's okay sometimes, I think, is also a really safe path as well.
No, that's very important. Yeah, it is usually the other way around. He was even like, what do you mean you don't know? You always know. And I was like, I don't know. But it is admitting it. It is looking at it differently. It's getting different perspectives. It's figuring out how to take the step forward. And sometimes it really is just taking a step back and getting out of your head, because it's very easy to get stuck in your head all the time. It's one step at a time. And it's an ongoing process. And even when you learn something and you move forward and you evolve, that thing that you learn, that skill has to then elevate with you. So even though you learn certain things about, say, measuring progress, as you go along, you're going to have to redefine it over and over again. You're going to have to redefine these moments, and it's okay to redefine it. And it's okay to ask for help when you need that help. And get out of your head and even take a break. I think we really don't take breaks, especially in the United States. We have this ongoing train mentality. We just keep going and barreling forward. Sometimes when you're just barreling forward, you're missing out on a bunch of stuff that you didn't see along the way.
100%. Your quality of life goes down and everything else. So that's a topic for a different day.
Well, Justin, as they say, all good things must come to an end.
Alas, they must. However, this isn't the end, because next week, same time, same channel, we drop another episode.
So get excited, because we're going to be diving deeper into all the topics of the not so subtle truth about success and
the art of sucking less in the pursuit of it. So join the conversation below and don't forget to subscribe.